Welcome to the TufFish Show. I am absolutely thrilled to bring to you Diane Grimard Wilson. Diane, oh my gosh, thank you so much for being on this show. I am thrilled you're here.
Thank you so much. I'm excited to be here.
I would love for you to please start because I have read your intro at the beginning, but I would love for you to start with how you got into writing. You have such a fascinating background between like the neurofeedback, being a clinical counselor, a professional counselor, and your peak coach. But how'd you get into writing?
Let's see. I did career coaching. Career coaching has been my calling for most of my career. And in doing it, I felt like there was pieces of information that people were missing, that in someone's career, if they lost their job or didn't like their job, feel fulfilled by it, it's like being out of love, that sense of missing something big in your life. And so in job transition, going to the next job, people usually have that kind of space, that emptiness. Psychologically, there's an emptiness where we feel often out of love and sort of crazed, like what to do with myself and just that lack of structure. And I felt like in the career books that there just wasn't anything that spoke to that. And I think this is helpful for writers, that if you feel sort of annoyed that something is missing, that the world needs something, that I think that's your cue. And so in time, I felt like, oh, that's my cue. That's a book I need to write. And that seemed like a horribly presumptuous step. But I think that when we do that, when we line up behind our purpose or what the world needs, that things happen. So I took a writing class in the Chicago area at a place called Ragdale. And I, at the same time, curiously out of the sky, was asked to write a column for the Chicago Tribune. That's super curious since I never wrote. But someone asked me, people go, well, how did you get that? It's like, someone asked me. And so, but I was taking this class, and so my teacher did editing and helped me with it. And so I was on a team of people, and we had a column called The Insider that went out to 2.5 million people. It was on the cover of the working section. So this was a long time ago, but it actually helped me launch my first book, and it was on the underbelly of career transition. So that was it. Like, that's how I got into writing. That's how I wrote my first book. And what I would say to writers is just really connect with how the world needs you. I mean, we talk about, especially in career planning, like what do I want to do? What shall I do and all that. And that's important to understand your intuitive drives, but also look outside of you and see what the world needs, because when you connect with that, it pulls your craft through you. So when I wrote Back in Control, I felt like it's like, this will help people. And that pulled through my story. So I was pretty lucky. I got a publisher, and I had a deadline that was, and I wrote the first book in 60% of it in 6 weeks. And it was just like, that's the power of deadlines. That was sort of meant to be. And then it was like, if you can do it in 6 weeks, if you can give us a book by Labor Day. And it was like, I can do that. I mean, I'd never written a book before. It was like, so I'll try it. And so then that was the first book. So that's how I got into writing, is just looking outside of myself, or trying to stay focused outside of myself and see what was needed.
But you just said a few things there that just so resonate with me. One of which is that, to me, there's a courage to follow the passion, that something's nudging you, something's speaking to you, that it basically kind of sounds like it's leaving you restless, and that you got to do something about it. So you're courageously, you're taking action, and that the world needs that from you. That to me, the way I say that is, there's only one you, with your gifts and talents and abilities and your personality and experiences. So you are the person who can share that, even if other people who might look similar or have a similar background or what have you, but there's something about the way you convey that message, the way you tell that story, that makes it, that feels, that puts a little bit more light in the world because you did it.
Mhm.
I love
In
that you
my
did that.
in my case with Back in Control, it would be like listening to my 1 o'clock client who'd be going, I'm so crazy. I don't even know what I'm going to do with my life. I'm 52. I should know that by now. I'm so embarrassed. I don't tell anybody. And then my 3 o'clock would be saying the same thing. And I felt like, wow, if these two people could talk to each other, that would be the greatest. They wouldn't feel alone. They would feel empowered. They would get the benefit of what others were thinking. And so that's what the first book is about. It's about feeling back in control by understanding the terrain, the psychological terrain of finding the next calling and creating that. I mean, it's pretty hard to create a next job or calling in a market like now or then, or when you don't hear back from people, you send out things. A lot of it's automated, and you put your heart and soul in a piece of communication and you don't hear anything. So we need a lot of structure and supports. And that's what Back in Control is. It's like these voices. I collected all this writing from different people in transition and then put coaching ideas around it, like, watch what you're thinking. And it just things that I learned from my clients and I learned from my coaches training.
I love that because to me, you saw where there was a need, you saw and had a heart to want to help and to be of service. But to
Mhm.
me, that is the element of what nonfiction is to me, where basically a book is a form of service. It's saying I want to be a part of a solution, and this book might just be a piece of that. It might not be the whole thing, but it gets that person started. It gets that reader moving to have some kind of transformation. Whether or not they shift their mindset is a big piece of it. Maybe they might be able to take specific actions that help to start to gain traction. But that's, to me, how I think of nonfiction, is that it's really about service, and it's about helping you solve a problem, and it's about creating a change, a transformation that you want to have in some way, because you've picked up that book because that book has spoken to you in some way.
Mhm.
you
Yes.
you talk
Uh,
about, I know you're a fellow with neurofeedback. What would you talk a bit about what that means and how that comes up in writing?
Yes. So just to kind of follow the book trend in the first question a little more here, then I wrote this book, I shared it, it was exciting. I was on all these interviews. I was so lucky and all. And then I was sitting at a stoplight and a car drove into me. So that was how brain dance came, is because I had a brain injury.
Oh my God, that had to have been frightening.
Well, basically, I didn't really understand it that much. And that's how these injuries can be, until it just took years to understand what had happened. And then I felt like I couldn't be the only person that's ever gone through this. That, you read about really serious concussions, brain injuries, months and months of hospitalization, but people don't really write about the interior corridors, the lives of people with moderate and slight concussions, but they are different. And I felt like for me, it was way an experience. It turned my life upside down and in ways I couldn't even describe for years. But so I felt like there were probably a lot of other people that needed to hear that story. So then that's what Brain Dance is about. It's about that story. Um, so yeah, so that's how I got into neurofeedback. I was tried all these different things, honestly, to just make my life work again. And then I curiously fell into neurofeedback, which was life changing. And then after a couple of years of training, brain training, which made a huge difference in my life, decided I wanted to be on the other side of the white coat or the treatment coat. I wanted to be like my neurotherapist, Elsa. So then she said, if you want to do this, you have to train with the best. You have to, and so and that was pretty hard request, or a pretty hard direction, because I wasn't really reading that many books, let alone applied neuroscience. So that that was a journey. But I don't know, I just feel like life calls you, and that's the thing, is to stay clear. It's a battle at points, but with the instinct, the intuition, the, where you're supposed to be, what you're supposed to do. So anyway, that culminated into Brain Dance, which has been just a really exciting journey.
So with Brain Dance, that is a memoir. And it has elements of helping and teaching, absolutely, but it's a memoir, which means to me, that's a pretty deep thing to write about. It's deep work. It's challenging work in a sense, because you're unpacking things and then figuring out also how to convey that so that someone who's not been in your shoes can appreciate it too. What was that like?
Hard. It was hard. Well, I knew when I was growing up that I wanted to write books, but I didn't write one for years after my first book, because I was injured, and I didn't. And every retreat I would go to, writing retreat, where you sort of dig down deep, and it's like, write about anything you want. You've been there for 2 days and all your defenses are down. And I would start writing about the accident. And so I knew it was the boulder in my soul that had to be written about. I knew that. And so then just creating structures, time and space around that. It wasn't, I didn't think it was easy. Plus, we couldn't remember like the sequence. My husband and I, just our room would be full of these stick-ons, and I had 5 jump drives of things, because I kept a journal since I was 16, like writing about my life, bits and pieces, emails, 2-3 laptops of stuff and pictures to figure out, like, could I drive then? Was I driving then? Or what? Is that when we went on the retreat with Thich Nhat Hanh? Was that, did we really do that? Like that sort of thing. So that was interesting. It took a while. So then I signed up for this class that was 12 weeks to write a book. And so I procrastinated the first 8 weeks, like all writers do, mostly figuring out where all this stuff was. And then drafted out something in the last 4 weeks. And then have, after that, like the next 1.5 to 2 years, writing, refining, adding, subtracting, figuring out what kind of memoir would best tell the story.
But yeah, as I hear you talk about all of those, though, what I hear though is it took so much courage. That took a lot of courage to not just heal from a trauma that happened, because that car accident was a trauma that was physically and mentally challenging, and emotionally too. And I would wager spiritually, then, in the sense that it just kind of, it really rocked you. But what I hear is someone who took a situation that could have made them bitter and made it better. And I hear someone who said, how do I take this so that others aren't alone? And that to me is a big piece of what I see in memoir, is that it's the desire to help others not feel alone, that feel like they are seen too. And so thank you for doing that, because
thank you.
That is courageous. That's beautiful and courageous. So what was it like writing so you go through this course, you have 4 weeks, and you write in the last 4 weeks, the first draft. But that was one form of writing that might have just even felt like just a lot of processing. Let me get this out. But to your point, you spent time, about 1.5 to 2 years, going back and forth saying, okay, do I need to rewrite? Do I need to add? Do I need to subtract? But what was it like going back through your own story and having space between not just the trauma, but the first draft to maybe the second draft to maybe the third draft? Did you feel like your writing was improving? Did you feel like more things came up that you needed to process? And if so, how did you, like, how could this help someone who is writing memoir as to process for their own things?
I think that's a really good question. I think that I love writing. And so I think if writers let themselves love writing, it's like a love affair. It's like you want to make something honest and beautiful. So that's it, to find the beauty in things that are really not like there's a story where I finally kind of come out, I'm recognizing, oh, it's like I've had an injury. I feel like now I have an identity. My life
Okay.
makes a little sense. And I meet this person, I know that she had a head injury. It was a big deal to go out, and I went to an event that she sponsored, and I sort of introduced myself and said, I had a head injury, thinking we would connect on it. And she goes, I love your shoes. And that's what she said. And so it was funny. It was like, it's like, how can I convey like what that felt like? And then I'm sort of stunned, even though in retrospect, I can see that was a pretty tall order of me thinking she's going to connect with me in the middle of this event on, her most vulnerable moments too. And then I just stood there a second, and she goes, and your hair. And so it was just really, that having an injury is funny. I mean, there were moments that were funny. And so it's like life has this whole rainbow of things with it, like funny, it's serious, it's scientific, love science. I'm super curious, love the brain, loved learning about all of that. So the book is more like a dialogue with me around what happened. And I tend to think things at points are pretty funny. So I don't know, people, am I answering your question? So how do you stay with that? It's like, well, try to stay out of the way, try to love what you're doing. It's just like let yourself love writing. I think that's what I tried to do, and try to stay really to be of service. Like you said, it's like this will help somebody. That's totally motivating for me. Maybe that's not the biggest motivator for other people. They have different motivators. That's mine. So my mission is around brain health and helping people understand the brain and how it functions and how it impacts on our life. And so that they would walk away knowing more about the brain, knowing more about their brain and things that have happened to them, even if they have never had an injury. So yeah, those are motivators for me. The other thing is I read Educated, Tara Westover's book, loved it. And I think reading memoir, when breath becomes air, that, searingly honest memoirs, life-changing, really hearing each other's stories. That's the best of life, really.
Yeah. And to your point, reading someone else's memoir, if that's where you want to write, reading other memoirs helps you to craft your own story, or helps you to, maybe you didn't realize, like you said, you saw some humor in it. You found a way to find humor. Maybe that's something that someone else might be able to do, going, is there a humorous side to this particular story that I'm telling that at the time really didn't feel funny at all, but now I can look at it and see maybe a couple of different other vantage points that I can bring into this to show like more depth or more perspective about it, that helps, because you've grown too. You've grown from that first
Yes.
chapter, from that first paragraph, to getting into the next draft, to getting it to the next draft. So as you're growing as a writer, as you're growing as a person, that is going to show up in each draft, in each iteration that you create.
Yes, yes, yes. I think it's especially in memoir too, that it's very important to, my commitment was around honesty. It's very important to stay with your commitment. I worked early on with an editor who said, oh, if we bump this up and tap this down, it'll have more of a story arc. And it was like, I'm not going to write my life story figuring out if it fits someone's arc who's no, that's not going to happen. So I just wrote my whole book, and it had its own arcs, and it was a real story, and it's been very successful. But I think that if we have a commitment to our own truth, to the truth of our story, of course you have to, modify some examples of it, and all client names are changed, and all in some of the main characters I changed names, and I'll be very open about that. Some people aren't, like my doctor, my neurotherapist, love these people, but and want people to know about them. That's another motivator. But finding the truth of your story, that's really, really important.
Absolutely. And when you're not just, you got feedback from others. So an editor was helping with one, but I also think when I think about editing, I look at that as that's a teaming effort with that author. Yes, my goal as an editor is to help and to add value to that story and to that message, and to help create a great experience for the reader. But it's really also about helping that writer tell the story they want to tell, and honoring that space. And it's their story at the end of the day. It's not mine.
Mhm.
I have if I want to
Mhm.
write something, I can do so, but my job is to help that person tell the story they want to be telling. So
Mhm.
I love that you said that. Now, one thing I know that you talked about, we talked about a little bit ahead of time, was
Mhm.
that you mentioned like getting feedback from others in your field. But basically, I would affectionately think of that as kind of like beta readers, people who are reading it ahead of the book coming out, maybe an advanced copy even. But a
Mhm.
beta reader is reading a little bit ahead of the book, and you still might be able to take changes on based upon a beta. So
Mhm.
tell me about what that experience was like.
Yes, yes. It's such an important aspect of it, because in telling the story, we can only first tell it, like first drafts are just us, and we can't see it from the outside. And that's where people like you are incredibly valuable, because all the assumptions that I would make in a paragraph about my world and what things meant, I can't spell out. I mean, so what I find of editors, developmental editors, it's like they just take the things that I'm assuming everybody knows, but of course people don't know, and help me put those in words. That's where I found editing hard, in the sense that they would, especially having had a head injury, it was like, well, what about this? When did this happen? And so they're like really, really hard questions. They always ask me really hard questions. And usually if they annoyed me a lot, then we got my best work out of me. It would be like, I'm going to do this my way. I'll answer their questions, but it's going to be, so that's kind of my process.
I
But
love it.
anyway, yes, it's like you can see it from the outside. You can see what could be there, that the person is probably telling you, but they're not writing. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yes. So I think in terms of that, and then with mine, there was the whole, do we make it prescriptive? Do we make it like someone 6 steps to overcoming a concussion? And even though there is some of that in there, but that's where developmental editing was helpful. It's like, no, there's some prescription. You'll learn a lot about the brain, a lot. Everybody says that. Even people in my field, leaders in my field, say I learned a lot just from learning at this level. But it's a story, and I think that was a choice. And I think in memoir there are these choices of how you want to angle things to tell the story. I chose to tell my story. It, I don't know, maybe I should have wrote a book like 7 tips to over, but it wasn't the story I wanted to tell. We'll write a workbook on it, or, there's room for that. But I think human stories are extremely powerful.
Oh, I wholeheartedly agree. And I think that if you were supposed to write the 7 tips to something or another, that it would have flowed a little differently for you. It would have come through differently, but that's not the story that showed up for you. The story that showed up for you sh- presented itself in such a way that memoir was appropriate. And I love that you honored that. I love that you said, this is this feels right to me on how I want to talk about this and how I want to help. But I like that you also put in pieces that teach, because memoir still has elements of teaching. It's just a different way of teaching. It's teaching, like you said, through a story, and it's through someone else's story that you start to, you, the reader, see yourself and are reflective about what you're learning, going, has that happened to me? Or, oh, could I apply that in some way without being told, okay, step one, you do X, step two, you do Y. So I love that you did what you did. I think that's wonderful.
I think it would be hard to be an editor at points, because you have to do things that the other person can't do. And so it's not always, people don't always know what they need from you. And they may not be able to accept it in the way it would be like, I didn't want to do that.
But I think that can be said about anyone. I think that when, like you said earlier, when you have that gift, when you had that passion, you followed it through. You let that come through. You got help where you needed it, whether it was people reading the book shortly after it came out or before it came out to give you feedback. And like you said, there were people, leaders in this field going, I've learned a lot. I think that's
Surprised
fantastic. But but all of that helped to go into creating this story, all of those pieces, because that kind of feedback, even after it's written, still gives you, as a writer, the confidence saying, wow, this is great. I can't wait for this to go even further. I'm so glad it's helping. It almost creates new ideas that you want to talk about.
Absolutely. I think as writers, we are independent people, that we want to create art. We want it to be ours. And I think that being with other writers and editors, that we can expand those potentials without compromising who we are. But for some of us, it's not the most natural thought. I in my first book did not know that many writers. In doing the second book, in Brain Dance, it's like I live in a community of writers. They're my pals. Their misery is my misery. That it's and their triumphs. And oh my gosh, I'm so dazzled by my colleagues and friends. I support them wildly. So now I would encourage writers to know that you can be independent, but also be with kindred spirits and learn an incredible amount, because being a writer is not easy. And in the digital age, there's so much to learn about having and sharing a book and getting it out there and all of that.
Yeah, but I think that, to me, when you've written something that you're passionate about, something that you're excited about, and you've trusted that this story has come to you to come through you, and you're getting out there and doing it. What I think is cool is that love comes through, and it's the love of what you've created, that love of writing, the love of wanting to share. And when you think of it as sharing, it doesn't feel as scary. It feels like, I'm so excited, I can't wait to tell you about it, type of thing, versus, oh, I have to talk about this thing. Yeah, no, I'm excited. No. I love what I've created. I love this idea, or what have you, especially if you know that it touched someone and that it helped someone. And I have no doubt that your books have done exactly that.
There is a lot to learn. Like right now, I'm pretty excited, but I'm also just totally mystified at how to get into book clubs. Like, my dream would be to have people sit around and talk about this book and their brain and the experiences they've had. And as a writer, you don't necessarily have that much time for, it's like, oh, I think I'll figure out Goodreads now, or it's like it's so impressive, the things that have come up around it. But I have full-time practice, private practice, and writing, and just staying in good health is, you can't learn everything, and it's just continues to grow. So I'm open for suggestions on sharing my book. It's it was a #1 bestseller. Okay, that's great. But my goal is that a lot of people would find themselves in it and find the wisdom and let it help their lives. That's my goal.
I love that. Diane, thank you so much for being on the show. Would you please let our listeners know how they can connect with you and where they can
Sure.
get the books too?
Absolutely. So it's on Amazon. This is what it looks like. This is the cover. It's one of the girls, one of the women in my writing group sent me this piece of art and said, "This is your cover." It was like, yes, you're
Yeah, it's
so
gorgeous.
intuitive. And so it's on Amazon. It's called Brain Dance. I'm Diane Grimard Wilson, and it's in Barnes and Noble. It's at local bookstores by order. And then also you can reach me through the geniuspodcast.us. I love interviewing people on human stories and scientists. I love science, people that help amplify our human potential, especially now, it's so stressful with the pandemic. And so it's a good time for us to come together and learn from each other. Let's see. So those are the primary ways. I have a website called braindancebook.com with a lot of the reviews that were done on it. I'm so grateful for. Those are key ways.
Awesome. Thank you, Diane. I'm so glad you've been here. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Really, it's been great.